Shut up. Okay, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to the Abergavenny Writing Festival. Welcome to some lunchtime poetry. An eclectic mix of poetry and memoir. We will have this afternoon. We have 4 performers, including myself. But to start us off, we have the publisher from Blackwell Press, Matthew M.C. Smith.
Hello. Okay. Thank you. It's really great to be here. It is intimate, cosy venue. Dominic, thank you. Thank you for the invite. I'm going to start off. I'm going to tell you a bit about a campaign that I've started in Swansea. But before that, I'm going to start off with a poem that people, if you're from around this area, you've possibly even seen this custom. Have you seen the custom of the Mary Lloyd? Mm-hmm. You've heard of it, yeah? Okay. So we don't know how it started, but at some point, maybe in the Victorian era, maybe earlier, some crazy people in a Welsh village decided to scare the hell out of other people by putting this horse's skull on a stick and then decorating it, putting ribbons on it and a cloak, and then just kind of going around houses and rattling this horse's skull onto people's doors and windows. Must be terrifying. So this poem is called Visitation Mary Lloyd. Horror, a horse skull. Bargain its bygone breath with death. The shock and shake of shell flays the air with its ribbon trail, flails, tails, natters, rattles against glass, thumps, clunks, doors ajar, stealing heat to slate sheen street. It reels, mocking Here's eyes and now's tongue. The mare's stare stuns a mortal's grimace. It lays bare a man to his knees, scything. He staggers, siding out from the hollow white skull, bearing, tearing down. The crazed stars are its crown. The skull careers, leers to fear's death's dance in time's town. Draw it back into its sack. Dumb it down to its dark. Another bargained breath. Exhale. Thank you. Okay, I've started a crazy campaign in Swansea, and it's to bring back the Red Lady of Haviland back to Swansea. Stick your hands up if you've heard of the Red Lady of Haviland. Okay, so in 1823, 201 years ago, this skeleton was found in Haviland Cave on Gower. Haviland Cave is actually one of the most difficult caves to get to in Gower. It's a very lonely place. Anyway, this skeleton was found covered in red ochre, covered in this red earth, and also covered with shells that had been bored through, so decorative shells. And William Buckland, who was the first, I suppose, the first archaeologist to examine this grave, thought that it was a lady, thought that it was a Roman prostitute, and all of these jewels, or all of these shells were some kind of decoration. Anyway, after DNA and a lot of research, it turns out that this skeleton was an Upper Paleolithic hunter, 33,000 years old. That's 3 ice ages back from now, and it's the earliest human burial, ceremonial burial in the west of Europe, and has huge international significance. Typically, though, it was taken. It was taken. The archaeologist Wynne-Paton took it back to Oxford, and it's been there since. So I started a campaign group, and what we would like to see is that Swansea has almost an international centre for the British Ice Age. That's a long intro. I'm going to read Paveland, Ice and Fire. I'm going to take you on a time-travelling journey. Paveland, Ice and Fire. Fissure of cave, being light, shade, starve, thirst, slip between worlds, tides at time's erasure. Before the flood, the sun and moon commingled in eclipse of heat and blood, dance into flames that lit this chamber, fall into fathoms before you wake. Kneel to the lowering of the body in hollow of rock. Shadows, faces, eclipse. Cover him in sacred ochre, with charms for a dead chieftain. Shells of nerite and periwinkle, wands of ivory, a pendant cone of tusk bone, flint tools roughly serrated, torches taper, black smoke rings, dark. Now his ghost blue light, place it all back, scatter in these rock beds a wreck of antlers, speckled bones and gnarled out teeth from time's migrations, once hoarded, then taken. Hyenas, bears, rhinoceros, herds of bison and elk. Recover the lost skulls of mammoth and the red man. Assemble his half skeleton, cover once more with ochre. Through museum's glass with polished frame felt, blindly see these shapes shudder through fire and ice. On the theme of Gower, this is Fault Wound. There's a beautiful cave called Bacon Hole Cave in Gower, frequently on Instagram, because it's just one of those supremely photogenic caves. Okay, so this is Fault Wound. In the slough of wide tide light, in the boom, I'm thrust to the shingle chamber, tip, touch the brail of rock and heave into the air, crouched before a fault wound and earthen scar. Step the green shelves where shadows wind and kinks of light kick as cup marks bubble from a riven roof. Lucence of fronds, verdant ferns quiver in draughts of the slanting vault. I scratch cave beds, barely print my feet in dust. A cave wreck of ice age bones. Bison, elk, hyena, flints worked in halos of fire. A scattered horde before the flood. Before Eden, beneath the blinding of sky-high ice. Probably time for one more, Dominic?
Yeah,
Just check.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one more. One more. Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to read one. Okay, so there's some places, if we've lost someone in our lives, there's usually one place where we feel we can almost connect with them. And that, for me, when I go to Wells Cathedral randomly, I feel like I feel very close to my father, who died about 12 years ago. And so this is just about that. This is called In a Tomb, Wishes Rising. Look upon these flaw-worn words. In a tomb, wishes rising. Gaze on lines of limestone columns. In a tomb, wishes rising. Hear the verger with iron keys. In a tomb, wishes rising. Mouth your prayers for loved ones lost. In a tomb, wishes rising. Candles aflame in solemn naves. In a tomb, wishes rising. Raise your eyes to rays of light. In a tomb, wishes rising. Stealth of dark through eyes wide bright. In a tomb, whispers rising. Thank you very much. Next up is Catherine.
So I'm Catherine Wynne-Paton, and I'm a visual artist, and I do lots of different things in different media. Okay, so just to let you know about this whole project that I've been doing called the Lost Library. So I make discoveries by pondering questions through movement, attuning to the place I find myself in, paying particular attention to the questions of the people in the places I inhabit, deeply listening. During 2020, I had live performances of the Lost Library cancelled, and I embraced my instinct to connect with others in many ways that were new to me, and I sourced questions and concerns from people through digital call-outs. Lockdown became a time that in some ways felt as if the world went to sleep. During this time, I've slowed down my process, yet increased the momentum through the challenge of producing weekly videos. With what and who I had to hand, my child became my camera person. I began this series of videos performing in my living room soon after lockdown began in April 2020, and later using my garden and then other outdoor spaces as the easing of restrictions allowed. I produced 17 videos and shared them online. What follows, well, first of all, is a short trailer, and then it's my reflections on these questions, and you'll see the videos that were made in 2020 alongside. Dear Verity, you asked me the question, why is uncertainty so much worse now when we know that life is uncertain? Almost exactly 4 years ago now. During a time when our freedom to go out and about was curbed for the first time by the pandemic. Moving back and forth, then sideways from a central point, I wobble and lean into the space in my front room. The moment felt heightened. There was, and always is, much at stake. My openness as a lost person in a lost library involves vulnerability and a willingness to do things I've never done, playfully. Perhaps this playfulness disguises my earnest seriousness about the task I set myself, to go into the unknown. This uncertainty was so noticeable, perhaps because society was collectively experiencing it, expressing it, thriving in it, or bottling it up. There was a huge feeling of threat to our friends, family, acquaintances, and neighbours. Something shifted. Society had passed some threshold. Some occupations became essential, and others less so in the eyes of the media. This uncertain time made previously less noticed phenomenon really stand out. The sound of birdsong, the light of traffic on the road, and the sky free of planes. The speed at which the homeless were found accommodation off the streets was breathtaking. The things that are possible when there's collective uncertainty, threat and anxiety. Less rushing, a reprioritising of life. The possibility we'll become more ourselves or lose ourselves. Developing clarity on what is important. Discovering from engaging in deeper uncertainty and adventure within the possibility of now. Some bumbling around is okay, though there comes a point when we will create a certainty or two for ourselves. To plan or to flow, that is the question now. Which is connected to reality and which imagination? It matters little when the two meet and mingle. Yours, the most lost, Catherine. Dear Vivian, thank you for your question. How challenging, i.e. uncomfortable, can art be in this current context? Art can be as challenging as ever, though whether it is accepted by the various cultural and wider worlds is another matter. I wonder if you mean challenging for the artist or challenging for everyone else. Art can be overwhelmingly sad, guilt-inducing, or preachy. The realities of people are mixed. There is a lot on the news of people missing human contact. Escapism is valued. Losing urgency and enthusiasm for things. In view of all this, is art relevant? I considered training to teach secondary maths. Really, it is always needed. It is valued. Whereas art is considered a nice to have, an extra. I wondered if I could teach mathematics, but really teach art and maths as co-joined subjects. Perhaps mutually destructive or beneficial. Who is art relevant to? Many artists are carrying on, making in their usual way, not much changed from before, following the long-term arc of their practice. They laugh from their own protective bubbles of money and time and space. What pandemic? Knowing this period will pass, things may carry on, same as ever for some. For others, the world has forever shifted. It can feel as if we are at a distance here to the real action, often portrayed as most exciting and refined in the metropolis. What do we imagine happens in a melting pot of a big city? Is it perhaps quite a lot like what we've got going on here? Yours, most uncomfortably lost, Catherine. Dear Becky, I have been thinking about your question. What things are you learning about in this unusual time? I am so methodical. I create routines and systems and overcomplicate things very quickly. Routines can hide problems as well as create structure to get things done. Busyness doesn't allow enough time for self-reflection. Physical activity can enhance the way life can flow in the most pleasing way, whilst having the active attention to notice things by giving myself time to be with my work. Experiment with it, push it, and get it out in the world. When doubt creeps in about the creative work I make, is it really the misfit of my plan for the work and reality, or is it simply that it needs more incubation time? Or am I prevaricating? I tend to think other people are superhuman. I'm noticing that I enjoy collaboration. I enjoy sharing processes with others. Initiating things is something I do almost automatically. Allowing people to come to me and using time even more wisely is a little bit magic. I am now beginning to find out the influence I'm having, a little bit, from the most sincerely lost, Catherine. Dear Josie, thank you so much for your question. How am I going to sustain the energy required to keep the kids interested in education? In my dance pondering for this question, there was looking up and mini circles, forming a circle with my arms, getting down and rolling over, stepping round in a circle backwards, sweeping arms forward from the rear. Rather than pure introspection, reflection, writing, for this one, I fairly soon began pulling together art materials and general prompts for creative starting points. Influenced by this question, and then hand-delivered locally by friends who are parents of school-age children, my child and I put notes through the doors of several streets in Abergavenny, offering the letterbox art deliveries. Adults requested the delivery for themselves. One parent said, "I liked how the materials were often pages taken from art magazines, as it was nice to have art tasks that didn't mean screen access at all." The kids' favourite tasks were make your own patterns with the multicoloured strips and the cardboard circle map painting task. We in general loved that it was a surprise on our doorstep in the morning. I cycled envelopes of art materials around, developing into an art suggestion worksheet with historical and contemporary artworks and ideas. In May 2020, after dropping off the latest delivery, I received a text message. "Thank you, Art Fairy." Before I knew it, 21 weeks had gone by, whoosh, from the busiest lost librarian of Abergavenny, Catherine. That's it.
Oh.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Dominic Williams. I'm a poet, and I'm going to read you a few pieces from this book today. This book was an output from an arts residency that I was part of. I was invited along with Irena Frantel, who's a bookmaker from Croatia. Milica Zdenkovic is a digital artist from Serbia. Martin Holm is a fine artist from Sweden, and then myself, a poet from Wales. And we've been invited to a residency in Sweden to respond to an archive of letters. Now the letters, we call the project the punk letters, because these letters all came from correspondence between young people in the 1980s, the kind of the second wave of punk, not the 76, 77 Pistols, but the DIY, the second wave of punk in the 80s, the DIY movement, where like everybody involved had their own band, everybody had their own record label, and a massive kind of peer support system all over the world. So this is before the internet. It's when a long distance telephone call would have caused your mother and father to throw you out of the house. So everything was done analog, everything was done by snail mail, basically. People were writing back and forth to each other. And many of the letters were very, very similar, because the most common thing was that people would be sending C60 cassettes back and forth to each other with recordings of bands. You'd get a letter that had a list of all the bands that you knew of, that were on your label, and people would want copies of that music. Has anybody heard of the soaked stamp? No concept. So you take your cassette, you put it in an envelope, and you write your letter, and you post it, you stick the stamp on, and then get a bar of soap and rub over the top of the stamp and create this waxy layer over the stamp, and then it'd be sent off. The receiver would have it. They'd take the contents, and then they'd scrape off the wax, which would also scrape off the frank, and then they could reuse the stamp to send things back again. And people used to see how often they could use the same stamp to have the correspondence. So anyway, a friend of mine, Lurkin, a guitarist with a punk band, he produced this box of letters that he'd been receiving from punks from all over the world. Obviously the letters he'd sent out we don't have, because it's a two-way conversation, but all the letters he received had come from America, Netherlands, UK, all over the world. And he had literally thousands of these letters, thousands of them. So they were taken to the Yongshiping County Archive. The letters being archived, turned into a digital archive, and then it was our responsibility as artists to respond to this archive. And it was amazing because, you know, I wasn't a punk in the 80s. I was into rock music. I was into Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, you know. But I knew that there was something going on, you know. A lot of those kids who used to stand in the corner all dressed in black in school were doing something. They were my peers. But I didn't really know what was going on. And I'd always thought of punk growing up as something that was really violent, confrontational, you know, anti-establishment. Well, yes, it was anti-establishment, and I guess maybe confrontational. But in these letters between all these young people in the 80s, these people who were only connected by punk music, you can see the beginnings of Black Lives Matter movement, you can see the beginnings of veganism, you can see the beginnings of gender equality. These were the values of these young people, and you can see how it impacted the 21st century. So one of the outputs from the residency was this volume, and it's what I kind of describe it as a hybrid, a lyric essay, if you like. It was a mixture of my journaling, my relationships with the other artists, my responses to the archive, the things I was learning, the social history I was learning, and then I suppose like a lyric essay, when it comes to some of those more intimate things that you didn't want to talk about or you didn't like to, then you kind of mask those things, and so it's punctuated by poems. But I give it to a friend of mine who teaches creative writing at Cambridge, and I've been calling it a lyric essay, but it just shows how publishers and academics, they kind of fight for the right to pigeonhole things, you know. And she said, no, it's an autoethnography, because that was 2 or 3 years ago, that was the new buzzword in research, is autoethnography. So that's how she described it. So let's give you one of the poems, one that I like to read, and just suggest to people, well, you take that as however you want to interpret it. The poems are scattered throughout the prose. There's no page references, I'm afraid, so no contents. Okay, so this is called The Bathtub in the Wet Room. I often think of the king in this tub. There are no taps, no plumbing. I shower like a lap dance, going through cleansing rituals, rinse, then soap, then rinse. I stand next to this empty Russian imperial throne dish. I think of him up to his regal beard in bubbles. I pass the shower head over my body, washing foam from any curve. Then I work, naked. No wet wastage in my obsession, my greatest pleasure, wiping every drop from the floor. But no longer with broad, strong strokes, delicate brushwork around ornate silver feet. So I had a couple of instances of imposter syndrome working with these contemporary artists who had all these wonderful works. And I can remember one instance we had this open day where everyone had big artist presentations. So these guys had all had exhibitions in galleries, they had wonderful PowerPoints, and they could talk almost as well as Catherine does about their work and their art processes. And I just like, well, here's a book of poetry I wrote, that's about all I had to offer. So I decided that I would take one of my poems, I'd recite a couple of my poems, and I would take one of them and I would perform it in a slightly different way to I normally do. And there's a poem I have called Madman on the Train, which I decided to do in a white vest with, and I got to grab somebody's flat cap and stuck it on, and I delivered this poem in this really, really confrontational, angry way. And sat in the front row was Lurken, the guy who had all these letters. Still plays in a punk band now, Rosvet. Rosvet is Swedish for arse sweat. That's the name of the band. But nobody, you know, 50-year-old councillors just talk about Rosvet now. They don't even think of the name of what it means. You know, it's just Rosvet is this band, but they're still touring to Brazil. So Lurken was in the front row. He's listening to this poem. He said, "Oh, we've got to do something with that. We've got to do something with that." So he and a group of friends reformed the punk band that had disbanded in about 1990. So here we are, nearly 30 years later. They reformed the punk band, and we made a vinyl album of their backing tracks and poets reading their poetry. So there were a few poets. Melitza, so we had some Serbian poetry. Elizabeth Torres is a Colombian poet. A couple of Swedish poets, Jonas Ellerstrom. So yeah, out of this project then became something like we became the punks ourselves, you know, and created this DIY thing. One of the things I did for my fellow artists, I gave them all a copy of my book, my collection of poetry, and in the front of each I wrote a dedication, something that was personal between me and them. And then I took all those dedications and I made a cut-up poem out of them. I took the dedications and then cut them out line by line and rearranged them randomly. So this is a cut-up poem, again, kind of very much that DIY thing. There you are, winter, flies above the silent forest, for Mila, under pine pale ale, for a renner, Mr. Underberg, because once upon a time, because hides true Troll's taste, for Martin, she feels in her gentle and strong. I know, because when a single crow, like a flower of stone, travelling with, that's where it ended. Another issue I had was it was suggested that we should produce some sort of exhibition out of the work that was made. And the other artists were doing wonderful things. Arena had made a beautiful little art book. Martin had took lots and lots of the doodles and the illustrations from the letters and made a new zine, a huge collage. And Melitza would interview people who'd been involved in the punk scene back in the 80s, people who were still involved in the punk scene. She would interview them, and then she would take portraits of them, and very unlike a portrait photographer, she would then ask them which of the portraits she wanted to use, and ordinarily the photographer decides what one they want. So she'd ask them which photo they wanted to use, and then she would develop the photo. She turned them into what she called fantastic portraits. And what she was trying to do was, following the interviews, she would try and capture their personalities and create these kind of mythical beasts that represented their values. And I used to like sitting in on those interviews. And here's a poem that I wrote following one of those interviews with an ex-punk who was now a local politician. And he spoke a lot about the values that he'd taken from those days into his political life and representing people. It's called Milk for the Feminists. This is an intergenerational poem. These meaty fists held trunks of fury, beat skin. These arms could crush skulls, but they were formed for lifting infants. My father said I would change. He shared different tones to me. My son shares ours, and my daughters will change this world. Rewarded by his nation in bronze for standing alone and defeated in council chambers, he continues to grow, uniting any who need unity, the truth of the best of times, given with slow understanding. Okay, I'll give you a couple more, rather than just wandering on through the story, so 2 more. So this is called Slut Station. Slut is Swedish for end or finish. So when you're travelling on the train, it comes up with the names of each station they're coming to, and then if the train's going to finish, it says Slut Station, Slut Station, because then we really want to go to the station and see what sort of people were there. So this is Slut Station. It was a beginning with a wide smile and an energy that shook the carriage and your oversized frames from your chuckling cheeks. Imagination wickedly fueled your mind's eye, made you dream of such wild places. He hid the tales of wild lands on the backs of questionnaires, checklists and chemical catalogues in a conference room. It took him 7 years to open that smile again, the slut's instant gratification. There was only a sleepy bus at the end of the line. Then, station's revenge, polished and creased and beautiful, slapped the spar, chasing fleeing friends, gulping from a water bottle. Okay, I'll finish with Dave Grohl's drum kit. She walked away from Tir Te Amo, places that do not exist, layers of bulb-lit corridors, second-hand spaces, into the woods, and inhaled the smell of traumas, wet leaves fallen, wet bark wormed and layered and no more, but always. Industrial perfume, evocation, pine chippings burned to feed a light giver. Like a pine air freshener, said a Swede. Not the smell of pine, but the smell of pine scent. Peeling green, balcony for deprivation, fir floors above a table for the drummer supine. Instead of rocking and rolling in Copenhagen, I met the Ramones in the Burger King in Copenhagen. Missed opportunities to beat the broken bass and smashed cymbals, snare of Nirvana, but that did happen. Thank you. 3 very different readings, I believe, so far. And the 4th and final reading for this wonderful lunchtime will be from Simone Mansell-Broome.
Thank you, Dom. Thank you to everyone who's gone before, Matthew and Catherine. I'm not an art fairy. I'm not a campaigner for the repatriation of Paleolithic remains. I'm not a punk. However, as a student teacher, I was mentored by Johnny Rotten's girlfriend.
Wow.
And she wore a duffel coat and the twin satin pearls, and she drove a Morris Traveller with 2 King Charles Cavalier Spaniels in the back. So she was very, very, very upper middle class. Okay, so I'm going to start with something from my memoir. Falafels, Some Frogs and a Ferret. Each chapter begins with the letter F. It's themed by F's. And the first little bit I'm going to read to you is from the first chapter, Fallen. You might become a fallen woman if you let yourself fall for someone, possibly unsuitable, or fall in love, fall off your pedestal, or fall from grace. You could get caught out or caught. You could fall pregnant, and it was a truly terrible thing if this was out of wedlock. A woman's life, it seemed, was about avoiding men while playing some sort of tag, ducking and diving and running faster. You had to be watchful and wary and faster, but not in the wrong way. It also, strangely, seemed to be down to women, the ones who would get married, to find a man in the first place. And what became apparent to me was that men didn't want to get found or caught, except the wrong sort. My father's older sister could have been defined by many as a fallen woman. No one would have dared to voice this within earshot of her immediate family. She was long gone from Wales while still in her teens. At several times in her full, colourful life, she was a practising Catholic. She numbered priests and monks amongst her acquaintance. This aunt had an eclectic and pragmatic relationship with God in his many earthly manifestations. The rest of Dad's family was mostly in a casual kind of way, Church of England in Wales, lowish, minimal popery, but not chapel. At my final convent, nuns filled our heads with the lives of saints. We were read these stories on rainy afternoons while we worked on bits of handicraft. Mine were grubby, unpicked, reworked and never finished. My reading matter at the time was a heady combination of illicit ghost stories, tales of the Greek, Roman and Norse gods and their frankly startling private lives, Shakespeare and children's poetry. The gruesome life and death stories of saints slotted perfectly into this mix. There was torture, execution, martyrdom, the most comprehensive range of savagery. Female saints seemed to have less interesting lives and far fewer adventures, and they were never really in need of much improvement of the repentance and reformation type, but they were besieged by men, constantly trying to corrupt them spiritually and corporeally. The punishments meted out to female saints were just as horrible as those experienced by the men. And baffling to me, at the age of 9 or so, the fall of man was Eve's fault too. Woman as temptress, aided and abetted by some convenient serpent. I'm as fuzzy now as I was then on the specifics, but the expression I was not to hear for many more years, "it takes two to tango," did not seem to apply at all to the Bible or to ecclesiastical attitudes. Women were bad, per se. I've never had a fondness for incense and always lacked the attention span to sit still throughout the Mass. But sin, confession, penance, and redemption remain a compelling foursome. And sticking vaguely with the theme of God, or possibly the absence, what do we do now? The deities have gone. Faith's a fuzzy memory filled with buffoons, dodgy clerics, and the frankly misguided, stranding us, secular, alone with no succour, familiar ritual for comfort. Our thoughts are with you, sounds so lame. But thinking of you is what I've done, have been trying to do, yesterday, today too, between the broken water main, the burying of my ancient cat, canvas saturated beyond the point of no return, a weeping bride, a tricky mother of the groom, weather defying all forecasts. I did try. Some might call it biblical, a scourge on unbelievers, a plague on climate deniers. Let me lighten the day with laughter at lunchtime, secrets shared over glasses of wine, since there is probably only now Prosecco and friendship, only now and love. God's keeping a low profile, a very low profile. You might say he's left the building. A couple of things the sharp-eared of you may have noticed is the mention of weddings. One of the many hats I've been wearing, and I'm not wearing one today, but one of the many hats I've been wearing over the last 14 years is I've been planning weddings on our farm. You've heard this one before. This is the poem about the first punch-up we ever had at a wedding, and I retain an incredibly soft spot for the groom in this particular wedding. I'll explain why. It was two families coming together from a coastal village in Ceredigion, and possibly for the last 200 years these two families had hated each other, but now, like the Montagues and the Capulets, they came together. However, that wasn't extended throughout their families, and the groom's sister and the bride's cousin had a full-on fight at the end of the wedding. He's a nice lad. You forget he's only 27. His brow folds, wrinkles, crumples. There are crevices you don't recall before 30. He's done well, dropped out somewhere between GCSEs and the end of year 12. Finished his education in the School of Board, surf and skate, then snow. Majored in minor damages, not doing himself injuries he couldn't get over. Gaining much on the hop, on the slope, curve, wave, ducking and diving, carving, swerving the turf, the powder he knew, had dealt with, had always dealt with. No big deal, no worries. This latest drama is just a blip. The past crossing his snowy graph, not worth breaking sweat, not worth breathing a word to this girl he's earmarked as his key to survival, to breaking free from generations, from history, from family. He's reinventing, creating his future, making that myth where it's all groovy, where he's in control, has a goal, with a guy with shifty, troubled eyes, a brow too creased for 27, gets the girl. She's an ice queen, pure and simple, AAA rated. Contrary to what you may be thinking, this isn't all about sex. However, fertility. Apparently sex was discovered in 1963, though like the Americas it might have existed quite happily by itself before then. I knew there were no gooseberry bushes under which babies might be found. In the long back garden of our Victorian red brick semi we had gooseberry bushes in abundance, also white, red and blackcurrant bushes, and an almost small orchard of wizened apples and fruitful Victoria plum trees. No bulrushes, not a swaddled baby or a stork in sight. My childhood friend had a prolific tabby cat. I saw plenty of newborn litters of blind, helpless kittens, even at the moment of their arrival. Their ultimate fate was appalling and glossed over by the adults. I knew perfectly well where babies came from. It was how they got there that remained a mystery. At school, boys were allowed to attend until 7, but there were only a handful of them, adored younger brothers of tribes of girls. Pupil names, apart from a few Marys, a Teresa and a Bridget and a Simone, were dominated by the Eans and Eanes, that's E-E-N and I-N-E. We had Nolene, Colleen, Pauline, Eileen, Christine, Maureen, Noreen, Josephine, Doreen, Kathleen and Geraldine, at least one of each, probably more. Noreen was the youngest of 9 and felt it to be her duty to enlighten her peers about the mechanics of conception. But I'm afraid, despite much giggling and whispering, I was to leave junior school not much wiser. Immaculate conception remained my only decidedly dodgy theory. Right, I am going to move back to the poems, and I'm going to move to another one about women, but this one is a little bit more, it's a lot more serious. So this is from the central section of Bracing, where most of the more political poems are, and the section is called Blast. Let me just check what we're doing. Okay. So I'll read this one. To my suffragette. This was written for the Attic Theatre in Newcastle Emlyn 6 years ago. I seem to I seem to get asked to write a poem around about International Women's Day every year. But this one was the first one I was asked to do. To my suffragette, and I wrote it from the man's point of view. The first suffragette hunger strikes began in July 1909. Marion Wallace Dunlop was released after 3.5 days fasting. By the end of September of that year, forcible feeding of prisoners was introduced. This procedure carried on until the outbreak of the First World War, when the WSPU, the Women's Social and Political Union, called for a temporary suspension of militancy, and the government granted amnesty to all suffragettes in prison. Honey, comfrey and calendula, arnica, hot beef tea. How can we heal you, make you strong enough, now the cat's released its mouse, you home to us, to our house, to me. I wasn't meant to be their mother, but we do our best without you, muddle through, suffer the jibes, the sly asides, the jeers. Sometimes my peers leave the papers open by a cartoon of an ugly, strident woman doing ugly, strident things, or slide a postcard under the door, so crude, so cruel, and so unkind, I must admit, I hide them from the girls. Poultice, salve, and balm, I'd like to shield you, keep you from all harm. Hard for a man to see his sweetheart hated and harangued, mistreated, manhandled. Harder still to know, to feel, and not to see. For what women do to property, man does now to womankind. Yet there's no shame for a man who wreaks havoc, lets go the dogs of war, kills and maims in name of country, God or cause. No, he's a hero, of course, garlanded with honours, statues, property, acclaim, applauded in epic poem, in songs of sword and fame, ennobled so his bravery carries on from son to son to son, amply rewarded for grandpappy's crimes. But she, maker of fire, destroyer of things made and owned by man, she's willful, misguided, out of control, harpy or a whore or a legion more hateful names. Deeds, not words, the Pankhurst said. Do not appeal, do not grovel, do not beg. Take courage, join hands, stand beside us, fight with us. And have you fought, my angel? You've changed, grown firmer in resolve as your body weakens still. Let me bind you, soothe and comfort you, clean your cuts, your wheals. But your mind's a stranger to us. Your face hides silent hurts, secrets left behind the prison door. Yes, Holloway haunts us day and night. And that three-coloured medal, purple, green and white, slumped against the mantel clock while you've been gone again. Thank God Joan of Arc wasn't married, that's what I sometimes say, as every time I get you back, something more of you has been stripped away. Ounces, pounds, stones, they've taken blood, hair, flesh, exposed your nakedness. It's all for king and country, how dare you make a fuss? Now the Kaiser's on the warpath, once again it's them and us. We can only stand by, patch up and mend, expecting the worst, as countless women have done for countless men, our roles reversed. Honey, comfrey and calendula, arnica, hot beef tea. How can we heal you, make you strong enough, now the cat's released its mouse, you home to us, to our house, to me. As for you, my battered darling, you're a woman out of time, before your time, for all time, right place, wrong time. They say you choose what you do, but where is choice when you are voiceless? Where is choice when you are voiceless? And when victory comes, where will you be? Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone. I hope you've enjoyed. I, for one, feel very proud to be part of this quartet this afternoon for this this magazine programme of literature and poetry. The festival is continuing today. It continues tomorrow. There are still lots and lots of events and workshops that you can attend. And I think probably the next event is taking place very soon over in the King's Arms. So, jump it off.